Caesar did not die because he failed to see danger. He died because danger looked like people he trusted. On the 15th of March, Julius Caesar was not marching into battle. There was no enemy army in front of him, no battlefield dust behind him, no sound of cavalry breaking the morning. He entered a political room, a place of robes, stone, names, rituals, and familiar faces. That is what made it deadly. Caesar had survived wars. He had survived rivals. He had survived men who wanted him erased. But that morning did not need an army to destroy him. It needed something far more dangerous. A great man who believed he was finally safe. The hardest enemy to see is not always the one across the field. Sometimes it is the one close enough to greet you. Caesar was not an easy man to destroy. That is why the story still cuts so deeply. He knew war. He knew ambition. He knew how fear moved through powerful rooms. He knew how to turn chaos into authority. Again and again, men stood against him. Again and again, he survived them. Every victory made him larger. Every survival made danger look smaller. And this is how the fall began. Not with a knife, not with a shout, not with a sudden weakness. It began with a slow change inside him. A man who wins too often does not lose caution all at once. He loses it quietly. Then he forgets he ever needed it. Victory did not protect Caesar. It trained him to underestimate danger. Success rarely destroys a man in one strike. It does something more patient. It changes the way he sees. At first, he studies every threat. He listens carefully. He measures the room. He expects betrayal because he knows the world is capable of it. Then he wins. Then he wins again. And slowly the warnings begin to sound dramatic. The fears begin to look small. The cautious men begin to look weak. This is where power becomes poisonous. Power rarely tells a man he is immortal. It tells him something more dangerous. You have survived worse. That is the lie that feels like evidence. Because once a powerful man stops doubting his own safety, his fall has already begun. At first, Rome celebrated him. Then Rome began to measure the size of his shadow. To some, Caesar was the man who had pulled the Republic back from chaos, a commander, a survivor, a force of order in a collapsing world. But to others, he was becoming something more dangerous, a man too large for the system that created him. That is when admiration turns unstable. People can love power when it protects them. They fear it when it no longer seems capable of stopping itself. The question was no longer, is Caesar great? The question became, what happens when one man becomes greater than Rome? Caesar saw his glory rising, but in the shadows, other men saw a future closing around them. And fear, once it believes itself righteous, begins looking for a blade. The terrifying part is not that Caesar was never warned. The terrifying part is that the warnings came, and he went anyway. Ancient accounts surround that final day with signs, uneasy words, strange dreams, anxious faces, a sense that something in the air had turned against him. But a warning is useless if it reaches a man who no longer believes danger can touch him. When a person is afraid, a whisper can sound like thunder. But when a person feels untouchable, even thunder can sound far away. Caesar did not need one more sign. He needed to remember one old truth. Danger does not disappear because you defeated it yesterday. The warnings were not absent. They simply reached a man who no longer knew how to fear them. Then he entered. The room did not look like a trap. That is why it was perfect. No battle smoke, no broken gates, No soldiers rushing forward. Only stone, white robes, measured steps, men moving closer as if they had something to say. On a battlefield, Caesar knew how danger behaved. But this was not a battlefield. This was a familiar room filled with familiar men, and familiarity is where caution often falls asleep first. The most dangerous traps do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive as a meeting, as ceremony, as respect, as men standing close enough to seem loyal, and close enough to make escape impossible. The space narrowed, the circle tightened, and the room Caesar trusted became the room that closed around him. The knives ended Caesar's life, but the face is what made the story immortal. In the final seconds of a betrayal, pain is not only physical, it becomes meaning. A man can understand an open enemy. He can understand hatred from a rival. He can understand violence from someone who has always stood against him. But betrayal becomes something else when it wears a familiar face. That is why Brutus remained more than a name. In the memory of the story, he became a symbol. The symbol of danger stepping out from inside the circle of trust. The symbol of the moment a man realizes he was not surrounded by safety, but by distance he had misread. In that instant, Caesar did not lose only his life. He lost the final illusion that had protected him. That those close enough to know you cannot also be close enough to destroy you. People say Caesar was killed by his enemies, but the crueler truth is this: he fell because he stopped believing they were still dangerous. The knives mattered, but before the knives came the blindness, the belief that repeated survival meant future safety, that old victories could protect him from new threats, that power was a shield, that familiar faces could not become fatal. History punishes that kind of certainty. Sometimes a man does not fall because he failed to see his enemies. He falls because he saw himself as too high for them to reach. That is why Caesar's death still survives beyond Rome. It is not only the story of a ruler, it is the story of every person who wins long enough to confuse survival with immunity. The most dangerous moment is not when enemies surround you. It is when you stop believing they can. That is when the door opens. That is when the familiar face steps closer. That is when safety becomes the trap.